Tuesday, June 15, 1943. Dearest Kitty, heaps of things have happened, but I often think I'm boring you with my dreary chit chat, and that you just as soon have your letters, so I'll keep the news brief. Mr. Roscrigel wasn't operated on for his ulcer after all. Once the doctor had him on the operating table and opened him up, they saw that he had a cancer. It was in such an advanced stage that an operation was pointless. So he staged them. So they staged him up again, kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, fed him well, and sent him back home. But they made an unforgivable error. They told the poor man exactly what was in store for him. He can't work anymore, and he's just sitting at home surrounded by his 8 children, brooding about his approaching death. I feel very sorry for him, and I hate not being able to go out. Otherwise, I'd visit him as often as I could and help him take his mind off matters. Now, the good man can no longer let us know what's being said and done in the warehouse, which is a disaster for us. Mr. Ross Crijel was our greatest source of help and support when it came to safety measures. We miss him very much. Next month, it's our turn to hand over our radio to authorities. Mr. Kleiman has a small set hidden in his home that he's giving us to replace our beautiful Philips. It's a pity we have to turn in our big Philips. But when you're in hiding, you can afford to bring the authorities down on your heads. Of course, we'll put the baby radio upstairs. What a clandestine radio when there are already clandestine Jews and clandestine money. All over the country, people are trying to get hold of an old radio that they can hand over instead of their moral booster. It's true, as the reports from outside grow worse and worse, the radio, with its wondrous voice, helps us not to lose heart and to tell and to keep telling ourselves, cheer up, keep your spirits high, things are bound to get better. Yours, Anne. Sunday, July 11, 1943. Dear Kitty, to get back to the subject of child rearing for the upteenth time, let me tell you that I'm doing my best to be helpful, friendly and kind, and to do all I can to keep the rain of rebukes down to a light drizzle. It's not easy trying to behave like a model child with people you can't stand, especially when you don't mean a word of it. But I can see that a little hypocrisy gets me a lot further than my old method of saying exactly what I think, even though no one ever asks my opinion or cares one way or another. Of course, I often forget my role and find it impossible to curb my anger when they're unfamiliar, so that they spend the next month saying the most impertinent girl in the world. Don't you think I'm to be pitied sometimes? It's a good thing. It's not a moaner. I'm not a moaner because then I might become sour and bad tempered. I can usually see the humorous side of their scoldings, but it's easier when somebody else is being ranked over the coals. Further, I've decided after a great deal of thought to drop the shorthand. First, so that I have more time for my other subjects, and second, because of my eyes. That's a sad story. I've become very short sighted and should have had glasses ages ago. Won't I look like a Muggins? But as you know, people in hiding can't. Yesterday, all anyone here could talk about was Anne's eyes because Mother Anne had suggested I go to the specialist with Mrs. Kleiman. Just hearing this made my knees weak, since it's no small matter. Going outside, just think of it. Walking down the street, I can't imagine it. I was petrified at first and then glad, but it's not as simple as all that. The various authorities who had to approve such a step was unable to reach a quick decision. They first had to carefully weigh all the difficulties and risks through. The Miap was ready to set off immediately with me in tow. In the meantime, I'd taken my grey coat from the closet, but it was so small it looked as if it might have belonged to my little sister. We lowered the hem, but I still couldn't button it. I'm really curious to see what they decide. Only I don't think they'll ever work out a plan because the British have landed in Sicily and father's all set for a quick finish. Beb's been giving Margaret and me a lot of office work to do. It makes us both feel important and it's a big help to her. Anyone can file letters and make entries in a sales book, but we do it with remarkable accuracy. Meep has so much to carry. She looks like a pack mule. She goes out nearly every day in sear vegetables and then cycles back with her purchasing large shopping bags. She's also the one who brings 5 library books with her every Saturday. We long for Saturdays because that means book. We're like a bunch of little kids with a present. Ordinary people don't know how much books can mean to someone who's cooped up. Our only diversion are reading, studying, and listening to the radio. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, July 13, 1943, the best little table. Yesterday afternoon, father gave me permission to ask Mr. Dussel whether he would please to be so good as to allow me, see how polite I am, to use the table in our room 2 afternoons a week from 4 to 5:30. I already sit there every day from 2:30 to 4 while Dussel takes a nap, but the rest of the time the room and the table are out of bounds to me. It's impossible to study next door in the afternoon because there's too much going on. Besides, father sometimes likes to sit at the desk during the afternoon, so it seems like a reasonable request, and I asked Dussel very politely, "What do you think the learned gentleman's reply was?" "No, I just plain no." I was incensed and wasn't about to let myself to put off like that. I asked him the reason for his no, but this didn't get me anywhere. The gist of his reply was, "I have to study too, and if I can't do that in the afternoons, I won't be able to fit it in all at all. I have to finish the task I've set for myself, otherwise, there's no point in starting. Besides, you are serious about your studies. Mythology, what kind of work is that? Reading and knitting don't count either. I use the table and I'm not going to give it up." I replied, "Mr. Dussel, I do take my work seriously. I can study next door in the afternoons, and I would appreciate if you would reconsider my request." Having said these words, insulted and turned around and pretended the learned doctor wasn't there. I was seething with rage and felt that Mr. Dussel had been incredibly rude, which he certainly had been, and that I'd been very polite. That evening, when I managed to get hold of him, I told her what had happened and we discussed what my next step should be, because I had no intention of giving up and preferred to deal with the matter myself. Pim gave me a rough idea of how to approach Dussel, but cautioned me to wait until the next day since I was such a flap. I ignored this last piece of advice and waited for Dussel after I had done the washing up. Pim was sitting next door, and that had a calming effect. I began, "Mr. Dussel, seemed to believe further discussion of the matter was pointless, but I beg you to reconsider. Russell gave me his most charming smile and said, I'm always prepared to discuss the matter even though it's already been settled. I went on talking despite Russell's repeated interruption. When you first came here, I said, we agreed that the room was to be shared by the two of us. If we were to divide it fairly, you'd have the entire morning and I'd have the entire afternoon. I'm not asking for that much, but 2 afternoons a week does seem reasonable to me. Justin kept out of his chair as if he'd sat on a pin. You have no business talking about your rights to the room. Where am I supposed to go? Maybe I should ask Mr. Vannon to build me a cubbyhole in the attic. You're not the only one who can find a quiet place to work. You're always looking for a fight. If your sister Margaret, who has more rights to workspace than you two, had come to me with the same request, I'd never even have thought of refusing. But you! And once again he brought up the business about the mythology and the knitting, and once again Anne was insulted. However, I showed no sign of it and let Desil finish. But no, it's impossible to talk to you. You're shamefully self-centered. No one else matters as long as you get your way. I've never seen such a child, but after all is said and done, I'll be obliged to let you have your way since I don't want people saying later on the end Frank failed her exam because Mr. Dissel refused to relinquish his table. He went on and on until there was such a deluge of words I could hardly keep up. For one fleeting moment I thought, him and his lies. I'll smack his ugly mug so hard he'll go bouncing off the wall. But the next moment I thought, calm down, he's not worth getting so upset about. At last, Mr. Dussel's fury was spent, and he left the room with an expression of triumph mixed with wrath, his coat pockets bulging with food. I went running over to father and recounted the entire story, or at least those parts he hadn't been able to follow himself. Pim decided to talk to Dussel that very same evening, and they spoke for me then half an hour. They first discussed whether Anne should be allowed to use the table. Yes or no? Father said that he and Dussel had dealt with one subject before, at which time he professed to agree with Dussel because he didn't want to contradict the elder in front of the younger, but that even then he hadn't thought it was fair. Dussel felt I had no right to talk as if he were an intruder laying claim to everything in sight. But father protested strongly since he himself had heard me say nothing of a kind. And so the conversation went back and forth, with father defending my selfishness and my pointless activities, and Dussel grumbling the whole time. Justin finally had to give in, and I was granted the opportunity to work without interruption for 2 afternoons a week. Justin looked very sullen, didn't speak to me for 2 days, and made sure he occupied the table from 5 to 5:30, all very childish, of course. Anyone who's so petty and pedantic at the age of 54 was born that way and is never going to change. Friday, July 16, 1943. Dearest Kitty, there's been another break-in, but this time a real one. Peter went down to the warehouse this morning at 7 as usual, noticed at once that both the warehouse door and the street door were open. He immediately reported this to Pim, who went to private office, tuned the radio to a German station, and locked the door. Then they both went back upstairs. In such cases, our orders are not to wash ourselves or run away any water, to be quiet, to be dressed by 8, and not to go to the lavatory. And as usual, we followed these to the letter. We were all glad we'd slept so well and hadn't heard anything for a while. We were indigent because no one from the office came upstairs the entire morning. Mr. Clement left us on tenterhooks until 11:30. He told us that the burglar had forced the outside door and the warehouse door with the crowbar, but when they didn't find anything worth stealing, they tried their luck on the next floor. They stole two cash boxes containing 40 guilders, blank checkbooks, and worst of all, coupons for 330 pounds of sugar, our entire allotment. It wouldn't be easy to wrangle new ones. Mr. Kugler thinks this burglar belongs to the same gang as the one who made an unsuccessful attempt 6 weeks ago to open all three doors, the warehouse door and the two outside doors. The burglary caused another stir, but the next seemed to thrive on excitement. Naturally, we were glad that cash register and the typewriters had been safely tucked away in our wardrobe. Yours, Anne. P.S. Landing in Sicily, another step closer to the exclamation. Monday, July 19, 1943. Dearest Kitty, North Amsterdam was very heavily bombed on Saturday. There was apparently a great deal of destruction. Entire streets are in ruins, and it will take a while for them to dig out of the bodies. So far, there have been 200 dead and countless wounded. The hospitals are bursting at the seams. We have been told of children searching forlornly in the smoldering ruins for their dead parents. It still makes me shiver to think of the dull, distant drone that signified the approaching destruction. Friday, July 3rd, 1943. Beb is currently able to get hold of an exercise book, especially journals and ledgers useful for my bookkeeping sister. Other kinds for sale Other kinds are for sale as well, but don't ask what they're like or how long they'll last. At the moment, they're all labeled, no coupons needed. Like everything else you can purchase without Russian stamps, they're totally worthless. They consist of 12 sheets of gray paper with narrow lines that slant across the page. Margaret is thinking about taking a course in calligraphy. I've advised her to go ahead and do it. Mother won't let me because of my eyes, but I think that's silly. Whether I do that or something else, it all comes down to the same, I think. Since you've never been through a war, Kitty, and since you know very little about life in hiding, in spite of my letters, let me tell you, just for fun, what we each want to do first when we're able to go outside again. Margaret and Mr. Vanden wish, above all else, to have a hot bath filled to the brim, with which they can lie in for more than half an hour. Mrs. Vanden would like a cake. Dussel can think of nothing but seeing his Charlotte, and mother is dying for a cup of real coffee. Father would like to visit Mr. Vauxhall. Peter would go downtown, and as for me, I'd be so overjoyed I wouldn't know where to begin. Most of all, I long to have a home of our own, to be able to move around freely and have something help me with my homework again at last. In other words, to go back to school. BF has offered to get us some fruit at so-called bargain prices: grapes 2.5 guilders a pound, gooseberries 70 cents a pound, one peach 50 cents, melon 75 cents a pound. No wonder the papers write every day evening in big fat letters. Play fair and keep prices down. Monday, July 26, 1943. Dearest Kitty, yesterday was a very tumultuous day, and we're still all wound up. Actually, you may wonder if there is ever a day that passes without some kind of excitement. The first warning siren went off in the morning while we were at breakfast, but we paid no attention because it only meant that the planes were crossing the coast. I had a trouble headache, so I laid down for an hour for breakfast and then went to the office at around 2. At 2:30, Margaret had finished her office work and was just gathering her things together when the sirens began wailing again. So she and I trooped back downstairs. Not too soon, it seems. For less than 5 minutes later, the guns were bombing so loudly that we went and stood in the passage. The house shook and the bombs kept falling. I was clutching my escape bag more because I wanted to do not have something to hold on to them because I wanted to run away. I know we can't leave here, but if we had to, being seen on the streets would have be just as dangerous as getting caught in an air raid. After half an hour, the drone of engines faded and the houses began to hum with activity again. Peter emerged from his lookout post in the front attic. Dussel remained in the front office. Mrs. Van D felt safest in the private office. Mr. Van Dan had been watching from the loft, and those of us on the landing spread out to watch the columns of smoke rising from the harbor. Before long, the smell of fire was everything, and outside it looked as if the city were enveloped in a thick fog. A fire like that is not a pleasant sight, but fortunately for us, it was all over and we went back to our various jobs. Just as we were starting dinner, another air raid alarm. The food was good, but I lost my appetite the moment I heard the sirens. Nothing happened, however, and 40 minutes later, 45 minutes later, the all clear was sounded. After the washing up, another raid air warning, gunfire, swarms of planes. Oh gosh, twice in a row. We thought that's twice too many. Little good that did us because once again the bomb rained down, this time on the other side of the city. According to British people, Schiphol Airport was bombed. The planes divided and climbed. The air was abuzz with the drones of engines. It was very scary, and the whole time I kept thinking, here it comes, this is it. I can assure you that when I went to bed at night, my legs were still shaking. At the stroke of midnight, I woke up again. More planes. Diesel was undressing, but I took no notice and left up wide awake at the sound of the first shot. I stayed in father's bed until 1, in my own bed until 1:30, and was back in father's bed at 2. But the planes kept on coming. At last, they stopped firing, and I was able to go back home again. I finally fell asleep at 2:30. 7 o'clock, I woke with a start and sat up in bed. Mr. Van was with father. My first thought was burglars, everything. I heard Mr. Van say, and I thought everything had been stolen. But no, this time it was wonderful news, the best we've had in months, maybe even since the war began. Mussolini has resigned and the King of Italy has taken over the government. We jumped for joy after the awful events of yesterday. Finally, something good happens and brings us hope. Hope for the end to the war, hope for peace. Mr. Kugler dropped by and told us that the Fokker aircraft factory had been hit hard. Meanwhile, there was another air raid alarm this morning with planes flying over and another warning siren. I've had it up to here with alarms. I've hardly slept, and the last thing I want to do is work. But now the suspense about Italy and the hope that the war will be over by the end of the year are keeping us awake. Yours, Anne. Thursday, July 29, 1943. Dearest Kitty, Mrs. Van Den, Dussel and I were doing the dishes and I was extremely quiet. This was very unusual for me and they were short notice, so in order to avoid any question, I quickly racked my brain for a neutral topic. I thought the book Henry from Across the Street might fit the bill, but I couldn't have been more wrong. If Mrs. Van Dan doesn't jump down my throat, Mr. Russell does. It all boiled down to this. Mr. Dussel had recommended the book to Margaret and me as an example of excellent writing. We thought it was anything but that. The little boy had been portrayed well, but as for the rest, the less said, the better. I mentioned something to that effect while we were doing the dishes, and Dussel launched into a veritable Tarot. How can you possibly understand the psychology of a man? That of a child isn't so difficult. But you're far too young to read a book like that. Even a 20-year-old man would be unable to comprehend it. So, why did he go out of his way to recommend it to Margaret and me? Mrs. Vandy and Dustin continued their harangue. You know way too much about things. You're not supposed to. You've been brought up all wrong. Later on, when you're older, you won't be able to enjoy anything anymore. You'll say, "Oh, I read that 20 years ago in some book." You'd better hurry if you want to catch a husband or fall in love. Since everything is bound to be a disappointment to you, you already know all there is to know is theory. But in practice, there's another story. Can you imagine how I felt? I astonished myself by calmly replying, "You might think I haven't been raised properly, but many people would disagree. They apparently believe that good child rearing includes trying to put me against my parents since that's all they ever do. And not telling a girl my age about grown up subjects is fine. We can all see what happens when people are raised that way. At that moment, I could have slapped them both for poking fun at me. I was beside myself with rage, and if I only knew how much longer we had to put up with each other's company, I'd start counting the days. Mrs. Van Dance, a fine one to talk. She set an example, all right, a bad one. She's known to exceedingly pushy, egotistical, cunning, calculating, and perpetually dissatisfied. Add to that vanity and coquettishness, and there is no question about it. She's a thoroughly despicable person. I could write an entire book about Madame Van Daan, and who knows, maybe someday I will. Anyone can put on a charming exterior when they want to. Mrs. Vandy is friendly to strangers, especially men, so it's easy to make a mistake when you first get to know her. Mother thinks that Mrs. Vandy is too stupid for words. Margaret that she's too unimportant, Pim that she's too ugly, literally and figuratively. And after long conversation, I'm never prejudiced at the beginning. I've come to conclusion that she's all three of the above, and lots more besides. She has so many bad traits. Why should I single out just one of them? Yours, Anne. P.S. Will the reader please take into consideration that the story was written before the writer's fury had cooled? Will you please remember this story written before? Okay. Tuesday, August 3, 1943. Dearest Kitty, things are going well on the political front. Italy has banned the fascist party. The people are fighting the fascists in many places. Even the army has joined the fight. How can a country like that continue to wage war against England? Our beautiful radio was taken away last week. This was very angry at Mr. Kugler for turning it in on the appointed day. Diesel is slipping lower and lower in my estimation, and he's already below zero. Whatever says about politics, history, geography, or anything else is so ridiculous that I hardly dare repeat it. Hitler will fade from history, and the harbor in Rotterdam is bigger than the one in Hamburg. The English are idiots for not taking the opportunity to bomb Italy to smithereens, etc., etc. We just had a third air raid. I decided to grit my teeth and practice being courageous. Mrs. Van Daan, the one who always said, let them fall and better to end with a bang than not to end at all, and with the bang than not to end at all, is the most cowardly one among us. She was shaking like a leaf this morning and even burst into tears. She was comforted by her husband, with whom she recently declared a truce after a week of squabbling. I nearly got sentimental at that sight. Mushi had now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that having a cat has disadvantages as well as advantages. The whole house is crawling with fleas, and it's getting worse each day. Mr. Clyman sprinkled yellow powder in every nook and cranny, but the fleas haven't taken the slightest notice. It's it's making all us very jittery. We're forever imagining a bite on our arms and legs or other parts of our body, so we leap up and do a few exercises since it gives us an excuse to take a better look at our arms or necks. But now we're paying the price for having had so little physical exercise. We're so stiff we can hardly turn our heads. The real calisthenics fell by the wayside too long. Wednesday, August 4, 1943. Now that we've been in hiding for a little over a year, you know what a great deal about our lives. Still, I can't possibly tell you everything since it's all so different compared to ordinary times and ordinary people. Nevertheless, to give you a closer look into our lives from time to time, I'll describe part of an ordinary day. I'll start with the evening and night. 9 in the evening. Bedtime always begins in the annex with an enormous hustle and bustle. Chairs are shifting, beds pulled out, bullets unfolded. Nothing stays where it is during the daytime. I sleep on a small divan, which is only 5 feet long. So we have to add a few chairs to make it longer. Either down, sheet pillows, blankets, everything been has to be removed from Dussel's bed, where it's kept during the day. And the next morning, in the next room, there's a terrible creaking. That's Margaret's folding bed being set up. More blankets and pillows, anything to make the wooden slats a bit more comfortable. Upstairs, it sounds like thunder, but it's only Mrs. Vandy's bed being shoved against the window so that Her Majesty, arrayed in her pink bed jacket, can sniff the night air through her delicate little nostrils. 9 o'clock. After Peter's finished, it's my turn for the bathroom. I wash myself from head to toe. And more often than not, I find a tiny flea floating in the sink only during the hot months. Weeks or days, I find a tiny flea floating in the sink. After Peter's finished, it's my turn for the bathroom. I wash myself from head to toe, and more often than not, I find the tiny flea floating in the sink. Only during the hot month, weeks or days. I brush my teeth, curl my hair, manicure my nails, and dab peroxide on my upper lip to bleach the black hairs. All this in less than half an hour. 9:30. I throw on my bathrobe with soap in one hand and potty, okay, with hairpins, knickers, curlers, and cotton wool in the other. I hurry out of the bathroom. The next in line invariably calls me back to remove the gracefully curved up unsightly hairs that I've left in the sink. 10 o'clock. Time to put up the black out screen and say goodnight. For the next 15 minutes at least, the house is filled with the creaking of beds and the sighs of work and spring, and then, provided our upstairs neighbors aren't having a material spat in bed, all is quiet. Marshall spat in bed. Providers Provided our upstairs neighbors aren't having a martial spat in bed, all is quiet. 11:30. The bathroom door creaks. A narrow strip of light falls into the room, squeaking shoes, a large coat, even larger than the man inside it. Dussel is returning from his nightly work in Mr. Kugler's office. I hear him shuffling back and forth for 10 whole minutes, the rustle of paper from the food he's tucked away in his cupboard, and bed being made up. Then the figure disappears again, and the only sound is the occasional suspicious noise from the lavatory. Approximately 3 o'clock, I have to get up to use the tin can under my bed, which, to be on the safe side, was a rubber mat underneath in case of leaks. I always hold my breath while I go, since it clatters into the can like a brook down a mountainside. The pottery is returned to its place, and the figure in the white nightgown, the one that causes Margaret to exclaim every night, "Oh, that's indecent nighty," climbs back into bed. A certain somebody lies awake for about 15 minutes, listening to the sounds of the night in the first place, to hear whether there are any burglars downstairs, and then go to the various beds upstairs, next door, and in my room, to tell whether the others are asleep or half awake. There is no fun, especially when it concerns a member of the family named Dr. Dussel. First, there is the sound of a fish gasping for air, and this is repeated 9 or 10 times. Then the lips are moistened profusely. This is alternate with little smacking sounds, followed by a long period of tossing and turning and rearranging the pillows. After 5 minutes of perfect quiet, the same sequence repeats itself 3 more times, after which he is presumably lulled himself back to sleep for a while. Sometimes the gun go off during the night between 1 and 4. I'm never aware of it before it happens, but all of a sudden I find myself standing beside my bed out of sheer habit. Occasionally I'm dreaming so deeply of irregular French verbs or a quarrel upstairs that I realize only when my dream is over that the shooting has stopped and that I have remained quietly in my room. But usually I wake up. Then I grab a pillow and a handkerchief, throw on my dressing gown and slippers, and dash next door to father, just the way Margaret described in his birthday poem. When shots ring out in the dark night, the door creaks open into sight. Come, a hanky, a pillow, a figure in white. Once I've reached the big bed, the worst is over. Except when the shooting is extra loud. 6:45, brr, the alarm clock, which raises its shrill voice at any hour of the day or night, whether you want it or not. Creak, wham, Mrs. Vandy turns it off. Squeak! Mr. Vandy gets up, puts on the water, and races to the bathroom. 7:15. The door creaks again. Russell can go to the bathroom alone. At last, I remove the blackout screen, and a new day begins in the annex. Yours, Anne.